Ask your questions, talk it through, explore, reflect, and synthesize.
Welcome to this webinar with the title Stop Coding, Start Talking. Find out how you can use generative AI in a methodological, sound way for your qualitative data analysis. This is basically a second video building on a first one where I mainly talked about the methodology that I'm proposing, or the methodological workflow I am proposing. And the idea here is to focus more on the actual how to do it, the implementation actually. The methodological workflow I'm proposing, I call that conversational analysis with AI. And for short, that would be CAAI. To make it sound nicer, I called it CA to the power of AI, not only to do that, but also to kind of express what it is. Again, it's not conversational analysis, it's conversational. So it is about the AI-human interaction. You as a human should be in the center. And we'll get to that a little bit later when I show you also a little video that I produced about that. So this is that methodological framework and workflow that I proposed in my last video. Or webinar, and I'm going to link the recording of that webinar also to this video here, and also put it in the comments. So I think it's both. It's a workflow, but also a framework for different methodological approaches. Because I don't think we need to throw away all the methodological approaches that we have been using in the past, be it content analysis, thematic analysis, discourse analysis, grounded theory analysis, narrative analysis. There is, of course, still, it needs to be still figured out, and people need to try it, experiment it, and maybe also adapt and adjust this framework. But what we're going to see, the cornerstone of this workflow is asking questions. And where I see that this can serve as a methodological framework is that depending on what method or methodology we want to use, we ask the questions differently. So if it's a grounded theory study, I would not just start with 20 interviews. I would start with one interview and start doing what we do in grounded theory. Looking at small excerpts and then brainstorming with AI, what could be potential meanings, and develop concepts from that. And then as more data coming in, you can start validating your concepts. So what we are doing today is we're looking at an interview study, and I'm always using most of the time I'm using my dissertation research for that. The data are 30 years old, anonymized. I do assume that you know your data, at least. Well, if you have conducted the interviews, I still have some vivid memories of some of the very intense interviews that I still have in my head, so I don't have to, kind of reread that. So I remember that. If you haven't conducted the interviews, it would be a good idea to read the transcripts, because now you are needing to ask questions about the data. You're not going through and code anymore, so you need to ask the right questions, and you also need to evaluate the answers, and you can only do that if you have some knowledge about the data. So that's kind of step number one. But there's also some additional things you can do to familiarize yourself with the data where AI can actually help. Prepared some screenshots here, because it's always easier to see in a PowerPoint than me kind of like clicking through an app. I will go into QInsights and show it to you there, but part of that I also have prepared here in this presentation. So at first, we need to kind of get that big picture. So we have maybe read the transcript or remember the interviews that we have conducted. And yes, and even if you use AI for transcribing, it's nearly perfect, but maybe still a good idea to kind of go through and double check. And then we can look at summaries to remind ourselves, to refresh our mind of what these interviews were all about, or we can also extract themes. And you might have seen many applications where, well, the theme is the end of it. Yeah, they extract themes and voila, that's your end result. I'm using the theme as a starting point. The themes give us a content map of the data. And the reason why it's not an endpoint is because every time we run a theme analysis and we're dealing here with generative AI, we're not getting the same results all the time. There is significant overlap, but it's not exactly the same. So you don't have to kind of remember all the details here, but just to kind of get the point, if you run a theme analysis, it was actually a total of 11 themes in this run, and you run it again, yeah, and you see slightly that certain things change, then you will get some new themes, and for some you have like similar names. It's probably the same, but the title changed a little bit, but it's actually kind of referring to the same kind of content in the data. And then I ran the third time, and here it was producing fixed themes. And if I kind of put these together, like just the labels, and organized in groups them, basically, maybe a sort of categorization. Still very skilled in doing that from all these years of coding. And we got this kind of blob with emotional compensation, everything on social influence and external validation, the drive of social image, expert self-image, and link to self-esteem. I could have probably, that's probably put the same. And then we have the influence of childhood experience, past experience, because that's kind of the same, regret, guilt, and financial aspects. So you see here there is a considerate overlap in the themes, but we get like additional themes in some of the other runs. So that's why a theme analysis can never be the end point, because it's not stable. Yes, you can, if you have influence on the tool that is doing it, and or maybe the whoever produces the tool, that they set the temperature to 0, there are probably good chances that you always get the same results. Here the temperature is set to 0.2, so it allows a little bit of variation, but we do see that even with the temperature of 0.2, you get some variation here. And this is just a matter of how we work with AI. Not to say we can't work with it because it's producing unreliable results. It's just knowing that this is what it does. And the same is if you work with 3 people and looking at codes and do your intercode agreement kind of thing, then you also sit there and brainstorm. And there's probably a good overlap of things people have seen, but there might be also things one person has seen and not the other. So that's kind of the same thing. It's just kind of done a bit faster. You can run it in a few minutes. But so it's treating the outcome of a theme analysis like deterministic, that this is the end, this is already the result of a study, is, I think, plain wrong. So treat it as getting a feel for the data. Where are there some interesting things in the data? And then you can move on to step 2. So we want to make that process replicable, and also add issues of validation and reliability to it. That means we cannot just kind of like, let's just ask questions, and a lot of people also at this stage also don't know, like, how should I query my data? So where should I begin? So building this framework is also giving people some ideas and guidelines, and some steps to kind of follow to get used to working in that conversational manner with an AI assistant. The idea here is that you pick one topic, and then you think about, how can I explore this topic? The studies on impulse buying, this extreme case of shopping addiction. Yes, I can just ask what are their motivations for impulse buying? It's a very broad question, but I can also think about layered questions that actually then taken together will give me the answer to what are the underlying motivations. So you pick a topic. Here there's actually Two I was using, working with, is the influence of past experience, also seeking approval and validation. So we can look at those two as examples, but there are plenty of other topics to choose from as well. And then there's also, of course, the idea of like, where do we start? Maybe, a starting point would also be like looking at how they define impulse buying and how that compares to planned buying. Later, also look at the influence of past experience. So you might also, when you start picking your topic, think about the red line of the study that you want to follow also in your analysis. So you start from whatever, historic, or from a broad perspective to a smaller perspective. So think about a sequence of themes that you're going to analyze that make sense. Trajectory of your study, the research questions. So here are 5 questions that are meant to explore that topic of past experience, or the effect of past experience on later impulse buying. It's something you can come up with yourself, or you can also ask your AI assistant to give it a bit of context and then say, I want to explore whatever topic you want to explore, suggest 3 to 5 questions. So if you have 5 questions, often there is some overlap in those questions as well, at least from my experience, that the questions become too close. But you can also kind of take that as kind of a validation, because then you get some repetition in the answers, but then that also kind of gives you an idea that, that is really also in the data. So whether it is really in the data also has to do with kind of what tools you are working with, and whether you can be sure that the question you're asking are only about your interviews and not something that is made up. Once you have picked your topic, well, you can go to your general purpose assistant, AI assistant of your choice. But as if you are here in QInsights anyway, you have a general chat also here. So you then also could ask here the assistant to give you ideas for questions. So if you right now, this study is about impulse buying, let's say it's 3. So there's 4 questions that I can explore this topic in depth. So now we get 4 questions that are kind of similar to what we have here. If you're not happy, give me 3 more ideas. This is just brainstorming. Yeah. And I didn't give it a very, precise description of my project. Now we get, into other aspects that we might or might not be interested in. And here are the 4 questions about approval seeking and validation. And these are also what you can put in the appendix later in your research report or your thesis or whatever. Yeah. So this is kind of your scaffolding of your analysis. So we don't have a code system anymore. So we kind of need to find some structure. Otherwise, how we go about analysis now. And so you pick your topic, you think about your questions. So these are your scaffolding. There might be some follow-up questions you ask in between. So they come then in between, but then these are the most general question. Just having those questions in front of us and talking about, structure and also reliability, validity kind of issues. Now you have these set of questions per topic. This is also a set of questions you can give to another person. Say, well, take these interviews and use these questions, go through the interviews, and then also work with your AI assistant and see what you get. And later we will talk about the next step and where you're going to compare results. But this gives you kind of a second view. I mean, you use the same scaffolding and also another person doing it, and maybe another person asking also different follow-up questions, depending on what that person sees. And then you later see what you have both been coming up with, and whether the AI also has been, or your AI assistant has extracted completely different kinds of things. Yeah. So these first questions are really meant more for retrieving. Yeah, so starting rather descriptive, not yet asking about, oh, what could this mean and what could be the interpretation? How can we relate this to theory? It's really on a start on a descriptive level. Also, when you start with coding, you're not immediately starting, looking for explanation. What is there in the data about this topic? So this is what this first kind of run through is, and you can of course run through on multiple levels, and then you're going to ask those questions. And here, what you also see on this slide is pick a focused set of documents to start asking the question. Yeah, and as I already mentioned, the way you ask the question can also relate to the underlying methodology you are using. It can be inductive, deductive, and yes, later on, if you work with follow-up questions or later stages of the product, you can have abductive questioning as well. But we have to start somewhere. And these questions are inductive that I'm asking. So I want to see what's in the data, not working with any predefined concepts. But that could be also an approach that if you have a theoretical framework and you have hypotheses and you want to start out with that. So that's also a possibility. So now let's move on to, or just look at QInsights. That's the dashboard. And you see I have plenty of projects here. And this one is just called illustration of CA to the power of I, but these have a subset of all my data in there. So it's 9 interviews. I have 3 shopper groups. And you can also, I created document variables for those. So shopper type and, well, gender. So I could also run a comparative analysis across gender if I wanted to, just to give you an idea how that looks like, how you can work with different subgroups of your data. So then you enter the values here. So I have utilitarian, compensatory, and addicted shoppers. And how we know that? It was a mixed method study, so we had some scales where we could measure that, and you also see that here in the document names. So these numbers all mean something. Yeah, to all those who actually were live in the presentation, because we talked about so many things based on your question, I thought I better, record again with a neutral presentation here. I did run the analysis when I talked with you across all interviews. And you now see I've run it for the separate groups here. Let me just, influence of past experience on impulse purchases. That was done across all interviews. I've also felt a bit overwhelmed. All the 3 shopper types going, in all of that felt a little bit too much. So that's why I was rerunning it and really focusing on utilitarian shoppers, compensatory, and addicted shoppers. To show you live, or not live, but at least this is the archive, so where all analysis is stored, to give you a bit of a feeling for the program. So if I'm just now setting a filter here, and it picks immediately only on my compensatory shoppers here. And if I click on analysis, these are the 5 analysis options. So theme analysis, I'm going to show you, so they're all in the archive, so I don't have to rerun it. And then we're working with the conversational analysis. The guided conversational analysis is something new. You can go and play with that, because oftentimes, not often, but some people are just happy to just start asking questions now about their data here. And you see now the filter set only picks on those 3 documents, and I'm only chatting now with those 3 documents. We'll start chatting. But some sit in front of this white screen. It's like, oh, how should I start? Yeah, giving you the idea. Start with one topic. Think about some questions you can ask. That hopefully already helps. But what the guided analysis is doing is actually guiding you through the process. It's asking you about your project. It's asking you about, okay, what you want to focus on, which topic you want to analyze, and then it suggests you those questions. And you can take it as an idea, or you can use those questions and just go through the workflow. So let's go to the, let's just reset the filter here, because we just work with the archive now. So you can also see here, yeah, that's also something you can do. I run a theme analysis just by certain groups in your data, so then immediately you have a focus. But what I've been showing you were the 11 themes with 2 unique themes, the 9 themes, and the 6 themes there on the. That's what I was showing you in the presentation, and then it looks like that. You go and show more detail. So here it says, we see that the theme is not applying to all of the interviews, just, well, to 90% of the interviews that people talk about luxury and non-essential items. And if you then are interested in actually looking that up in the data, then you can. So that is one of the unique things, also what makes it different from a chatbot. Here you can always the data always grounded in the source, and you can always also go and look where Steve or Joe or whatever talked about luxury and non-essential purchases. And let me now show let's stay with the past experience, and let me start with the utilitarian shoppers here to show you the dialogue. So you've seen the 5 questions I had in my PowerPoint. So I'm now, if you have those questions and put them somewhere or in an editor somewhere, you can just copy and paste them if you run it across different subgroups of your data. What you also see here, I'm now working with 3 documents. If I work with 9 documents, the answer will be shorter than what I get here. The more data you throw at an LLM, the more it starts summarizing and aggregating. Yeah, those 9 interviews, they probably still within the context window limit. That the context window is kind of the short-term memory, what an AI can handle. The more documents you select, the more high level will be your answer. That's why I generally prefer to work with smaller subsets. These chats, you don't need hours to do those chats, and just rather do them with smaller groups, you get more detail. If we would say we have, maybe if I have 15, maybe I would have started, with 5 of that particular shopper group and see what comes out. And then I can also work either I decide I learned enough now, I only want to see whether I can validate that within the other 10 interviews, or I do 5 and 5 again, and to see whether I can validate what I already learned and whether there are aspects in there that we haven't covered with the first 5. So then we move from an inductive to a deductive approach. So whatever I learned here in this chat, I can then check whether I also see that in the other interviews, and then extract examples, quotes, and that kind of stuff. Underneath each answer, you can go and look that up in the original source and to see, where it's actually in the original source document. Often you also need to read a little bit above and below, but that gives you more context. So it's highlighting something, but then there's probably also something that applies there also in the paragraph below there. And so, but there's always that link back to the original source file. Then we have the second question: can we identify patterns where early life events are echoed in their motives? And then how do citizens describe self-image? And of course, also with utilitarian shoppers, there's something related to their path, but it might not be linked to their shopping. You see also play a significant role in their shopping behavior, influencing whether they engage in impulse buying or prefer planned purchase. Yeah, so it's not here, it just actually goes the opposite way. And then what I do like to do is kind of get case-based summaries, so that I have kind of a comprehensive summary of the person in my chat, and then looking for similarities and differences, unique perspectives. That's always kind of good to have in the chat as well, for, because then you sit with the text and analyze further. You can also ask for surprising elements in the story or in the interviews related to that aspect you are looking at, and see whether the AI points out something to you. Yeah, and then ask for possible explanations. So this is always kind of more the brainstorming, not the result yet, but just give me some ideas, and then I can do something with that later. And then I ask it to provide like an overview table. And I think it was providing an overview table of what it thought we just chatted about, and then I gave it the questions again. So I get a specific overview table, and then you have all the other stories behind it. So this is now one of the chats, and I have 3 of those. Now you have to do something with it. So if you export it, then it's probably at least 10 pages long. And yeah, and if you export it, then you also get everything that was highlighted in yellow, all the reference to the original sources, you get that as well. It would make sense to include it. If you don't want to include it, you can deactivate references, then you only get the chat. But that might be, just having the chat there, it's something also as an audit trail. You might not want to use the references there for the audit trail. But this is also for making your analysis transparent. I think you get more transparency here with the way of reasoning, and if you're asking follow-up questions, than you get with coding. Because you have a code definition, but you don't have like a sentence where every time you apply a data segment to a code, or okay, code to data segment, why did I now apply that code to that particular data segment? You don't have that kind of reasoning. But here you have the entire kind of chain of thoughts that you have with your data and the, whatever the AI pulls out. At this stage, start out with this, that I get on a more descriptive level. So what happens in the data with regard to past experience of respondents and how that relates to their current shopping behavior. And you can see already here that this is very different from coding. Because when we code, I would have coded, oh, these are all the past experience, and these are all the impulse purchases, these are all the motivations, these are all the triggers, and then I have to kind of bring it all together. Here I can ask that question, how do past experience relate to their later impulse shopping behavior? So we can all bring it together, because the AI is looking, in this instance, it also would needed to look at the entire interview, the entire narrative, to kind of pick that out. Yeah, if you only ask for, what are the items they buy on impulse, you can also do that. Yeah, then it only needs to look for those. Those kind of questions are also easy. You don't have to code for them. Just like, what are the items they buy on impulse, and then you get a list. And then maybe you can, are there any? Do they buy particular items depending on a particular mood or something? Those kind of questions. It's you're much more in the narrative of the interviews when engaging in conversation with the AI assistant. And let me go back to the archive. So I have now 3 conversations: past experience, utilitarian shoppers, compensatory shoppers, addicted shoppers, which I now download and read. And then I have to start making sense of it all. And of course, you need to digest it somehow and starting to write about it. You could, why do I have that now? It's probably here. I have uploaded past experience on impulse buying, a report here, so totally output basically, and also approval and validation, that report is also uploaded. And then you could also go into a conversation and then kind of ask write this up as a report. That is still not your report. There's probably a lot of things that you don't agree with, but you have like a draft you can work with. And we all know how difficult it is to start with that white paper. Where do we start writing now? You go to the dialogue, and now we need to synthesize. So we need to kind of sit now with what comes out, and then also partly go back to the data. You should read it while you go through the dialogues, that you read it, and then while you're doing it, asking follow-up questions. You can, of course, also do that also later, but I would stay with that scaffolding of the question, read what comes out, and then if you see something where you need more detail about, or have some more questions, or want to dig deeper, you just ask follow-up questions. So you all have that already in your output that you can then work and reflect. But still, it could be that then while you write it up, and then, what was the quote again? Or, you go back and ask some very specific questions and retrieve certain information. So it could also be that you still, you have some conversation running where you just ask them more specific questions that come to your mind when working with the report. And as I just mentioned, so you can also then start writing on your own, or you have now all these questions, you have the key insights, and with those tables at the end, and let your favorite AI assistant basically help you with the writing. This should look like as what I put together here in that video. If you want to revisit a video again, it's on YouTube, it's on my YouTube channel. I had this vision of you being the conductor in your relationship with the AI, also inviting your synthesis, and also when in the whole analysis process. So the AI assistant is basically, if you are a conductor from an orchestra, these are all the players that you have in the orchestra, and they know their instruments very well. They have been well trained. But in order to bring this all together and make it a beautiful symphony, it needs the conductor. It needs you. It needs your expertise. It needs your context knowledge, your knowledge, what you know from your field, your expertise, because only the conductor can give the right emphasis, asking the right questions, and sensing the right interpretation and so on. But the AI, like the players in an orchestra, as I mentioned, they have been well trained. So the AI had been trained on a vast amount of data that we know, and yes, it's biased and all that discussion aside, but it has lots of niche knowledge as well, because there's so much information on the internet, also from small discussion groups, and like also knowledge and information that you probably don't know anything about. You have your expert knowledge, but you can now work with somebody together who has been trained, and also the conductor is probably not being able to play all instruments in the orchestra, but it can lead and direct the people playing. So let's look at that video for now.
The data is your score, a layered composition of human voices and emotions, waiting to be interpreted. The AI model is your orchestra, versatile and rich, but untuned. Until the conductor steps in, it doesn't know how to play your score. You are the conductor. Drawing on context, experience, and theory, you begin to prepare the performance. With each cue, you shape the flow, emphasizing key patterns, reframing the voice, shifting the analytical lens. This process is iterative. You revisit your data, cross-check interpretations, and re-enter the dialogue with greater depth. You test ideas, you challenge the model, you refine the narrative until it resonates with meaning and clarity. Insight emerges from entangled interplay between data, model, and you. Knots of tension become moments of insights. The final synthesis is co-constructed, grounded in your judgment, yet enriched by the model's intertextual reach. You orchestrate meaning. Through dialogue, reflection, and intention, you bring insight to life, without ever ceding interpretive authority. This is CA to the power of AI, a new way of thinking where sense-making is shared and insight is a collaborative act.
CA to the power of AI. Ask your questions, talk it through, explore, reflect, and synthesize. Let your data speak. You're in charge to analyze.
So a little bit of fun here. What you saw in the, well, I don't know the English word right now, Abspann in German, that all the AI tools I've been using, so the entire video is AI based. The images I've generated with VO2, we're already on VO3 right now. The music, that's what I let it run. In the end, the text is always me and ChatGPT So what you saw in the end is also epistemological consideration, who is now creating the knowledge. In the paper I wrote about this, and I also put the link in the comments of this video. I take the position that kind of take the AI assistant or the large language model basically on board, because I also draw on the kind of generalized training data it has, but of course in that fashion that I presented here, being the conductor. That also applies to writing. You get some draft writing, but then you fill in the blanks or tell the assistant, no, this needs to be that and this needs to be that, and take that quote and do this and do that, whatever. So you can also make writing also in more and more as a form of conducting, but that's up to you. So you can either write the synthesis completely yourself, and I think there's of course always us who are not native in English. That's always easier to have an AI assistant help. And anyway, so this is good, how a synthesis could look like, and now based on the three groups with some comments in there. So we need to, of course, get away from the 30 pages, and the topic might be a chapter in a report, might also be a subsection in the report. Then this is how a summary table could look like. I think, we also have seen a table also in the chat there, but that can of course also become part of the report. So that is how synthesis can look like. And then you need to kind of loop between step 2, 3, and 4 basically it is. So it's one topic, and then even if I work with subgroups, then did write the synthesis afterwards, after I work with the 3 subgroups. But then you would then say, well, now I take the next topic. So you go back and say, okay, what's my second topic I want to write about? Start thinking about the questions again. What kind of questions can I now ask to explore that next topic? And then again, you decide which subgroups you want to work with, and so on. So this is why there is this loop between 3 and 4, and of course also bringing in then of course new topics, new questions from step 2. So what you also see here is that when you have lots of data, I just had talked to people in the live webinar that they have upcoming studies with like 60 interviews. Again, I would advise to start working with subgroups and maybe 10 interviews at a time, depend also on the length of the interview. Always knowing the more data you would throw into the analysis, the more you would say on the surface. So it could really also to be said something about, let's stay with 3 interviews in one subgroups to start with, and then again I do a second chat with the next 3 interviews until I get a feeling, maybe I do it again, and then I have 9 to 10 interviews, and then I start seeing some patterns that are coming up. So I don't see anything new. So basically, again, simulating something we have been also doing when we coding, because you need to build your coding system, but you don't kind of like start coding all of your 60 interviews and then you start rewriting, reorganizing your codes. No, you don't do that. You build your coding system maybe on the first 5 to 7 interviews, or maybe if you have 60 interviews, maybe it needs to be a bit more. But then also you probably don't, take those interviews that are all the same, but you make a selection of subgroups in your data so that you can cover mostly all topics that are in there, and based on that you start refining your coding system, and then you start applying it to kind of the rest of the data. So those principles, that they all still apply. Then if you see, well, there's nothing new coming now from the data, so we kind of have grasped the main concept that are in there, and then you can move on to from an inductive to a deductive kind of approach, that you kind of said, okay, this is what we learned. See, now do we find that in the other data? And then you can of course always ask, beyond those points that we now have discussed, is there anything else in the data that we have overlooked? So then you also get in those new aspects that there might be 2 or 3 other aspects in those new data that you haven't covered yet. So it doesn't mean that you lose them. You can still ask for those. I will be able to pick that up. I mentioned briefly, with the validation, that because now you have your subset of the question set, put it that way. You have your question set per topic, and then you can give that to another person or run the analysis yourself again. I have actually an example of that. So here I have an example where I looked at impulse buying across addicted shoppers, and that was a repeat, and that was the first one. So you can also do this. You can do a cross-person comparison or a comparison across time. So you just run the conversation again, and then you have two conversations, and you can see whether you have the different things coming up in the second conversation. But of course, the cross-person comparison, if that's an option, is always better, because then you also have not a second chat where there might be nuances in the chat, but also a second person looking at, maybe also asking maybe some different follow-up question, having a different eye or perspective on things, and then you can discuss those. Based on that, it could also be, if you do that early in the process, so kind of mirroring if you do intercode reliability at the beginning of the study to build your code system, you can also, if you do that at the beginning, you can start refine and adjust your questions. If you think like, oh, these questions were not quite good yet, so you can do that as well. Trying to kind of mirror things we already are doing and just thinking about how can we do those differently. Now, having this new technology where we can just ask questions where we no longer need to code the data. I'm here again in QInsights to kind of recap so how the approach can be conducted in an app like QInsights. So I select a subset of documents. The first step could be theme analysis. We have here a theme analysis. Well, now I set the filter here, but as mentioned, run it 2 or 3 times to see whether you get more exhaustive list of topics. And then you decide on, okay, now this is what I want to focus on. And then you start your conversational analysis as an example. And you start here, and now I'm showing you, now I've in the editor here, I have my list of questions that I've come up with, and you can just, copy and paste those questions. And then you can start your dialogue. Another analysis I just wanted to show you is grid analysis. So in case you're wondering, so what you now get here is a response per person. So that could also be an output that is interesting to you. And if you wanted to dig deeper, you can start a conversation again. So this is also linked to be able to ask follow-up question. So that could also be something that instead of the conversation analysis, you put your questions here. The last option here is sentiment analysis, but that's only for Excel files. It's for semi-structured data, so that goes beyond this presentation. And just to wrap up here again with the overall view of this proposed, I think I can talk about methodology, not only a method, because I'm having this, because we need to rethink who knowledge is created. So we have to start also with that epistemological question. And you're going to need to take the stance, we need to take AI or include AI into the generation of knowledge if we actually work like that. This is the end of this webinar, or the re-recorded webinar. I hope you enjoyed it and could get some tips and insights and ideas how you can pursue your own qualitative analysis with the help of a clever AI assistant or informative one, whatever you want to call it.
To the power of AI, ask your questions, talk it through. Step 1, start with themes or summaries. A bird's eye view brings things to light. Step 2, shape your path with questions wise. With open minds and goals in sight. Step 3, start the conversation now. Ask and follow where insights allow. Step 4, interpret right, your insights grow. Let patterns speak, let meaning show. Then loop again, go back, refine. Each topic takes its own sweet time. Steps 3 and 4, they work as one. Until your insight work is done. Is done. Step 3, start the conversation now. Ask and follow where insights allow. 4, interpret right, your insights grow. Let patterns speak, let meaning show. Then loop again, go back, refine. Each topic takes its own sweet time. Steps 3 and 4, they work as one. Until